In my home state of Washington and across the U.S., general aviation means jobs that pay well, and it means and is part of the key to a long-term economic growth. A recent study found that GA industry supported an estimated $247 billion in economic output and 1.2 million jobs in the U.S. in 2018. However, the COVID-19 pandemic forced the industry to face several challenges, including workforce reduction, supply chain disruptions, and other issues. To help put GA back on the right track, Congress took several steps to ensure pandemic relief protected U.S. aviation jobs and keep supply chains moving. For instance, the Aviation Manufacturing Jobs Protection Program, which Representative Estes of Kansas and I introduced in August of 2020 and was included in the American Rescue Plan, protected or saved 3,100 highly skilled, good-paying jobs in aviation in my home state and more than 30,000 jobs nationwide. However, Congress can and must do more to better prepare the GA sector for future disruptions. And over the weekend, I was able to attend the Tarkio Air Show with Ranking Member Sam Graves and Ranking Member Garrett Graves, which provided some very helpful insights into the priorities of GA operators and companies. And today's witnesses represent a cross-section of the GA industry, including aircraft owners and pilots, helicopters, manufacturers, state aviation agencies, small airports, and business aviation interests. I look forward to hearing more about how Congress can support safety and innovation in this growing industry. Now, while the U.S. economy is on the move, the GA sector, like many other industries, is facing workforce challenges to meet the growing demands of the flying public. Congress has an opportunity to build on progress made in the 2018 FAA reauthorization law and invest in future general aviation operators, technicians, and manufacturers. The 18 reauthorization included several workforce development provisions to improve the recruitment of young people and women to careers in the aviation industry. For example, in March, the FAA's Women in Aviation Advisory Board submitted its report entitled Breaking Barriers, Flight Plan for the Future. And I plan to use the report's recommendations and others from aviation stakeholders to build a framework for diversifying the aviation workforce. The 18 law also created the Section 625 Aviation Workforce Development Grant Programs to invest in, recruit, and inspire the future aviation workforce. And I'm working to develop legislation to increase funding for this initiative and expand eligibility to include aviation manufacturing and to help build the U.S. aviation workforce to meet current and future demands. One issue I heard from GA stakeholders at the Tarkio Air Show is the mounting workforce issues as well at the FAA, which are creating backlogs in rulemaking and regulatory processes. Stakeholders are also concerned about the agency's staffing shortages and the subsequent lack of institutional knowledge and how that may hinder U.S. leadership in global aviation. So I look forward to hearing from today's witnesses on how Congress can help improve that staffing and reduce any negative impacts on the agency's efforts to move forward on appropriate regulation and rulemaking. And finally, I want to touch on emerging technologies. To support the future growth of the GA sector, Congress must create a regulatory framework that prioritizes safety, invests in the necessary infrastructure, and help to make communities globally competitive well into the 2050s and beyond. Over the last 2 years, this subcommittee has heard from several stakeholders about the U.S. aviation innovation and how emerging airspace entrants and technologies, such as advanced air mobility, or AAM, can offer potential societal, safety, and environmental benefits. Congress is taking concrete steps to help make those concepts a reality. So as we move into the 2023 FAA reauthorization, Congress must evaluate the role of AAM and what role it will play in the GA sector and what needs must be met to safely integrate those vehicles into the U.S. airspace. And the GA sector is also committed to addressing the industry's contributions to climate change. In recent years, the development of electric and hybrid-powered aircraft are among efforts to reduce carbon and noise emissions. For example, in my hometown of Arlington, Washington, the Arlington Municipal Airport is located there, and it is home to Aviation, an aviation company which is developing the 9-seat all-electric Alice aircraft with local people doing the work. The GA industry is also working to adopt alternative fuel sources to reduce carbon emissions from air travel, such as development and distribution of sustainable aviation fuel, and we also have the looming issue for the GA sector related to the transition to lead-free aviation fuel. So I look forward to hearing from you more about how Congress can assist in ensuring a safe transition to lead-free fuels for GA. So while the economy is on the move and the future of aviation remains bright, the GA still faces several issues that must be addressed. And today's witnesses will provide much needed insight on the GA's industry priorities and how Congress can be a better partner in these efforts. Thank you. I look forward to tackling these issues in a collaborative manner. And now we'll turn to Representative Graves of Louisiana for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for having this hearing today, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here. Before I jump in and talk about the topic of today's hearing, this is the Aviation Subcommittee, and I do want to make note the hundreds or perhaps even thousands of phone calls and emails and contacts we've received from folks expressing strong concern about their experience in aviation. And over the past few months, we have heard countless stories about folks experiencing horrific problems traveling, trying to take a summer vacation, trying to help resume the economy by doing business travel, and experiencing problems at the airport, experiencing problems going through security, experiencing problems with weather delays, air traffic control, and of course the airlines. This is something that is having an incredible impact. Let me say it again, not just on folks trying to take their families on vacation and enjoy a relaxing summer vacation before school starts, but also those that are trying to help with resumption of economic activity across the United States. And this is something that we must make sure that we tackle and get to the bottom of this issue. Like Chairman Larson, I had the chance to join many of you at Tarkio, and I think the panel today looks a lot like the one we had over the weekend. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the conversation. I enjoyed the panel, and looking forward to today's discussion. General aviation is a critical part of our nation's economy, particularly in rural areas like Tarkio, where I wasn't sure Tarkio was ever actually going to show up. I thought it was just going to keep being dozens of miles of farms, but it plays a critical role in the economy. And what we're talking about today, and many of us spoke about over the weekend, is how we're going to incorporate new technology into the national airspace system. And as the chairman mentioned, right now, we're already seeing the FAA struggle from an organizational struggle, from an experience perspective, struggle from a regulatory perspective, dealing with their legacy mission, much less the complexity of bringing new technologies into our airspace. And I'm very concerned about what that does to commercial travel, what it does to general aviation, and of course, what it does to potentially thwart or impede the ability that an objective I know we all share, which is incorporating drones and AAM into advanced air mobility into our national airspace system while maintaining something that I think is really important to emphasize, while maintaining this amazing record of safety that we have in the aviation industry, which of course is that air travel is the safest mode of transportation in the United States. And we must continue to maintain that gold standard. The United States has an incredibly robust network of general aviation airports and heliports that touch virtually every American, not just the airport in Tarkio. And I imagine that we'd be hard pressed to find a member of Congress that doesn't have a desire to incorporate new technologies into the aviation system. In fact, my home state of Louisiana, in the district we represent, Houma Airport, which is the base for much of the offshore energy operations, they also have been leaning forward, embraced new innovative technologies, and I know that they're excited to continue moving forward aggressively in AAM, again, advanced aviation systems, advanced air mobility operations and on the horizon, and are trying to plan accordingly for the new entrants, but I think that some of the regulatory uncertainty has challenged even them. We've got to continue to contemplate what this regulatory structure looks like for advanced air mobility, but we must also think about the infrastructure needs that are there. It's not just about the regulatory structure, particularly technologies like eVTOL, thinking about the infrastructure that's needed for those, how general aviation is going to be affected, and making sure that we have the proper infrastructure to facilitate all. The brainstorming and problem solving is pivotal to the safe and successful operation of AAM, and of course, ensuring that the United States maintains its global leadership role. Thankfully, last month, the House passed 2 critical bills on this, and we're hopeful that the Senate takes a similar path and gets these to the President's desk as soon as possible. Future regulations must contemplate new entrants into the market, and I'm looking forward to hearing y'all's thoughts about the safe integration of those systems into our NAS. Thinking briefly about drones and the ultimate full-scale integration into the NAS, also want to hear your thoughts on issues that are either of interest or more likely a concern, and how we can start bridging the gap between the general aviation industry and this growing drone and AAM industry. So, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for holding this hearing today and look forward to hearing from our witnesses.
Thank you, Representative. Now, before I turn to Representative DeFazio for a statement, I've got just 3 items, very quickly, administrative items. One is to read the speech I should have read at the beginning. I ask unanimous consent the chair be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. And as a reminder, please keep your microphones muted unless speaking. Should I hear any inadvertent or advertent background noise, I will request that the member please mute the microphone. And to insert a document into the record, please have your staff email it to documentsti@mail.house.gov. That's first. Second item, administrative item, we are expecting votes sometime between 11 and 11:30 on probably a previous question and a rule, possibly a suspension after that. So I would guess 2 to 3 votes. So we're going to get through opening statements and see where we sit, but I don't expect the votes to take that long since right now it's just probably, again, a previous question and a rule vote. So we'll continue after a vote start on the floor. We'll continue for a little bit before I make a decision about whether we're going to just roll through the vote on the floor or we're going to recess and go to the floor. We'll figure that out later. That's second, and there was a third item that, a third item. I will, since this is a GA hearing and we have very few general aviation pilots in Congress, one of whom is the ranking member of the full committee. He's not here, but if he does get here and seeks to have an opening statement, I will suspend the current status of the hearing to turn to the ranking member for an opening statement, just to give a heads up as a matter of courtesy as well. So that's third. So with that, I will turn to the chair of the full committee, Representative DeFazio, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding this in hearing. Most people don't know how important general aviation is to the economy and the people of the United States, and I'm pleased to be able to highlight that here today, talk about the future of the industry, potential growth into the future, the needs on the ground. Out of the IIJA, we allocated $2.5 billion to non-primary commercial service and GA airports. I don't know that that's adequate, probably not, but it's a start on dealing with that. I had the privilege last weekend or the end of last week to be up in the Columbia Gorge and see a very innovative instrument landing system at the Dalles where the FAA had spent $9 million for an ILS that they can't use because it gets too much bounce off. It's basically in a bowl. But this other system developed by a company called ANPC used a lot by the military, and they're trying to get updated certification from the FAA. I went up in a small plane, and I got to witness it on the ground. It's an extraordinary system, which would help dramatically for GA and allow us to have a lot more airports that could have systems like that. I'm not selling that particular one. There may be others like that, but I was very impressed, and it's much less expensive than your traditional ILS. It took us over 3 years to get ILS into Roseburg, Oregon, because of terrain issues, having to buy some property from a landowner so we could take down some trees and blah, 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 and we still have very limited approach there. So I think there are ways, and I'll be interested in any ideas people have that will help facilitate that kind of safety. Safety overall is better over the last 20 years, but we're not there yet. There's still too many accidents, and I'm going to be interested in hearing ideas about how we can make GA safer, whether it has to do with training or equipage or, the airports themselves. What are the issues that you all see? I'm going to be interested to hear about the Eagle Initiative. Coming from the 9th largest state in the union, GA is very, very important to Oregon and most other Western states. Not to say it isn't important everywhere in America, but for us, it's kind of a lifeline. So thanks for being here today. Look forward to testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now I want to welcome our witnesses. I'll just do quick intros in order, and then we'll start. So first will be Mark Baker, President CEO of Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. Chris Ozansky, Executive Director of the Naples Airport Authority on behalf of the American Association of Airport Executives. James Viola, President CEO of the Helicopter Association International. Pete Bunce, President CEO of the General Aviation Manufacturers Association. I hope your plane's working. Timothy Obitz, President CEO of the National Air Transportation Association. Greg Picorero, President CEO of the National Association of State Aviation Officials. And Ed Bolin, President CEO of the National Business Aviation Association. Thank you for joining us today. I look forward to your testimony. Without objection, the witnesses' full statements will be entered into the record. And since that is the case, we ask the subcommittee requests you limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. And with that, Mr. Baker, you may proceed and recognize for 5 minutes.
Good morning. Chairman Larson, Ranking Member Graves, and members of the subcommittee, on behalf of the Aircraft Owners Pilots Association and our 300,000+ members, I'm pleased to be here to discuss the state of general aviation. General aviation has been an important part of my life for over 4 decades and continues to be part of the fabric of this nation. GA, as you said, does represent $247 billion industry and supports more than 1.2 million jobs. Our communities serve more than 5,000 public use airports across this country. General aviation is currently in a good position and weathered the COVID pandemic fairly well. In fact, many found time during the pandemic to pursue flight training. It also became apparent that GAA was a significant resource for moving medical supplies and physicians to the areas most needed. Even with the increasing number of aircraft taken to the air, the skies have never been safer. According to the NTSB and our own AOPA Safety Institute, the past year has been our safest on record. And while we achieved impressive results, there's still much more that we can do. Safety is embedded in our culture at AOPA, and the Safety Institute works every day to educate pilots so that we can continue to ever improve this record. As the committee is fully aware, our aviation system is facing a workforce shortage, including pilots, mechanics, technicians, and air traffic controllers. We very much appreciate the support of the committee in moving this bipartisan and bicameral legislation, H.R. 3482, this past April, to help address this issue. We also applaud the committee for including 2 aviation workforce development grant programs in the 2018 FAA reauthorization statute, commonly referred to as the Section 625 program. AOPA has made major investments in aviation's future through a rigorous 4-year high school STEM education curriculum. During the past year alone, our curriculum engaged more than 12,000 high school students in 44 states, sparking aviation interest careers everywhere. Yesterday, I was in Oklahoma, where 57 high schools will now have our high school education program, the largest in the country. We have also a nationwide shortage of aircraft hangars at GA airports. According to surveys we've undertaken, some airports report waiting lists that stretch out several years. And hangar shortage are a top concern among pilots. We look forward to working with the committee as well as other number of GA airport-related issues in next year's FAA reauthorization process. I must make mention of the overwhelming success of the medical process reform for GA pilots, known as Basic Med. More than 70,000 pilots have flown under these privileges since this committee and Congress sent legislation to the President's desk in 2016. Finally, the most pressing matter of fact facing GA today is moving lead from avgas. As co-chair of the Eagle Initiative, which stands for Eliminate Aviation Gasoline Lead Emissions, I can tell the committee the entire GA industry, including my colleagues here today, are all working together to remove lead from avgas. We have set a target date of no later than 2030, and I remain hopeful we can get there much sooner. What we are concerned about is this terrible precedence that the Santa Clara County in California has pursued by preventing the sale of 100 low-lead at their 2 airports. This is an enormous safety issue, and if not addressed, could lead to a domino effect at other airports across the country, which would cause a real struggle if we lost control of our ecosystem of these public use airports, supplying fuel while we work to get this transition done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. I will now recognize, just a moment, Mr. Rosansky from Naples Airport.
Good morning.
5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the subcommittee. Appreciate the invitation and the chance to speak to you about the state of general aviation. I am the executive director for the Naples Airport Authority, which is one of the top 10 busiest airports for private jet activity in the nation. Testifying today on behalf of the American Association of Airport Executives, where I serve as the association's General Aviation Committee Vice Chair. I want to begin by thanking you for your staunch support of GA airports, which, as you know, plays a key role in our aviation system and our local economies. In Florida alone, more than 100 GA airports generate an economic impact of nearly $18 billion annually and support more than 108,000 jobs. GA airports deliver an array of vital services, including business aviation, flight training, law enforcement, firefighting, and medical transportation. We also help to reduce congestion at nearby commercial service airports. While many commercial service airports are returning to 90% pre-pandemic employments, many GA airports have exceeded those 2019 activity levels. These positive trends are a result of various factors from increased flight training, charter, and the proliferation of remote work. We're very grateful for the support Congress provided airports throughout the pandemic and investing in airports' capital needs. But as you have already alluded to, there's more we can do. At Naples, we intend to use funds from the bipartisan infrastructure bill to complete critical safety improvements such as navigational improvements that may not otherwise compete for discretionary funds. The infrastructure bill represents a step in the right direction, but there is still an enormous gap. According to the FAA, airports have $8.7 billion in annual AIP-eligible projects, with almost $3 billion of that going to non-primary airports. The latter is almost as much as what commercial service and GA airports receive in total from AIP each year. And these estimates do not factor in non-eligible projects, dramatically increasing labor and construction costs, and continued supply chain constraints. As we prepare for the next reauthorization bill, we urge Congress to increase traditional funding, consider proposals to both reform and bolster non-primary entitlement funding, provide funding for supplemental discretionary grants that help airports meet those infrastructure needs. I'd also like to thank subcommittee members for being strong supporters of the FAA Contract Tower Program, a successful public-private partnership, enhancing aviation safety throughout the nation. Naples is one of 260 airports in 46 states participating in that program. While the pilot shortage has received a great deal of attention, we're facing a shortage of air traffic controllers as well. One way Congress can help is by passing the Contract Act, which would provide an incentive for retired federal controllers to continue working at federal contract towered airports. Federal contract towers also need greater access to technology, such as radar displays, next-gen type equipment, to ensure the continued safe and efficient operation of the national airspace. Naples is a noise-sensitive community with residential development surrounding the airport. Federal noise policy established decades ago has helped tremendously, but we need a more collaborative, modernized approach between the FAA, airports, and their communities, whose concerns extend beyond traditional noise contours. Airports are also doing their part to reduce pollution and promote sustainability. Through AAAE, GA airports are participating in the EAGLE initiative aimed at eliminating leaded aviation fuels by 2030. However, we must thoughtfully consider and prepare to execute a transition without putting the vital services GA provides at risk. We're eager to better understand what types of infrastructure improvements are needed to support the adoption of these new fuels. Like members of the subcommittee, we too are excited about advanced air mobility and eVTOLs. It's imperative that airports are part of the discussion of the integration of these new entrants into the national airspace. We also need to find ways to pay for the new infrastructure needed for these new entrants without compromising the funds available for traditional airport projects. In closing, with greater demand, new technology, and continued support from Congress, the future of the nation's GA airports has never been brighter. We look forward, on behalf of AAAE and my colleagues serving general aviation around the country, we do look forward to working with this subcommittee on the upcoming FAA reauthorization bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it very much. Now I'll turn to Jim Viola from the Helicopter Association International. You're recognized for 5 minutes. That microphone turned on, please.
Thank you. Chairman Larson, Chairman
And then if you
DeFazio.
could pull the microphone right, there you go.
Closer.
There you go.
Chairman Larson, Chairman DeFazio, Senior Member Graves, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for your leadership and for holding this hearing today. I appreciate the opportunity to provide testimony today. Every day, vertical flight serves the public good. The unique capabilities of vertical flight mean we can accomplish missions that no other aircraft can. Our members perform various services, including air medical, law enforcement, firefighting, heavy construction, urban air mobility, and more. For example, helicopter air ambulance operators transport roughly 1,000 injured or critically ill patients every day. Ensuring the safety of those who fly is always HAI's top priority. Air Safety Management System, or SMS, is vital to reducing accidents and ensuring that every person understands they are responsible for safety. HAI's SMS program allows all operators and maintenance providers to elevate their safety. HAI supports requiring SMS programs for all operations, carrying passengers for hire, and strongly recommends that all aviation operations implement an SMS program. One of the most significant safety projects we have undertaken is co-leading the Vertical Aviation Safety Team, or VAST. It's an expansion of the International Helicopter Safety Team, and I'm honored to serve as a co-advisor with Miguel Marin, who represents the International Civil Aviation Organization. And VAST is a public-private initiative designed to enhance safety in the vertical flight industry worldwide. Our programs of safety are designed also for future aircraft. HAI has been an early supporter of AAM and UAS technology. Our members have been operating in vertical mode for 75 years. It makes complete sense for our members to embrace and use this new technology. We strongly support the development, certification, and safe integration of AAM and UAS aircraft into the national airspace system. The FAA must have an effective yet flexible certification system that enhances flight safety and enables the swift recognition and adoption of new technologies while facilitating a user-friendly process that is economically viable. Investment in AAM infrastructure, along with the improvements in the certification process, will ensure that the United States remains as a world leader in aviation. Today, helicopters are performing many urban air mobility missions that future AAM aircraft will do. To remedy future roadblocks for AAM, we must solve current pinch points for the vertical flight. Airspace congestion resulting in reduced access to low-level IFR routes is of serious concern for current helicopter operations. So too is the access to the ground infrastructure. We must increase vertical flight's ground and air access points or face a detrimental impact on the future success of AAM. We must always consider community compatibility. HAI's Fly Neighborly program is a voluntary initiative for employing noise mitigation technology and increasing effective community communication. On June 24th, HAI partnered with the Eastern Region Helicopter Council, introducing a helicopter noise complaint system for the Washington, D.C. metro area. Using available flight tracking data, the systems will accurately identify likely aircraft generating the concerns. Just flying safely and in compliance with the regulations is not enough. We must also fly neighborly. It is in the best interest of everyone. HAI is dedicated to reducing greenhouse gas emissions from aircraft and developing and using sustainable aviation fuel. Incentivizing SAF and investing in sustainable aviation initiatives are essential steps Congress should take. Another important environmental issue is the transition to lead-free aviation fuel. The Elimination Aviation Gasoline Lead Emissions, the EAGLE initiative, as mentioned earlier, lays out a plan to transition to lead-free aviation fuels by the end of 2030. HAI is committed to this partnership. Due to the pandemic-related economic disruptions, many seasoned pilots and technicians retired early. Congress, the FAA, and industry stay focused and recognize that developing the next generation of pilots and mechanics requires a long-term commitment. We appreciate Congress's creation and funding of the Aviation Workforce Development Grant Program in the 2018 Reauthorization Act, and HAI strongly encourages continued support of the grants program. HAI also encourages congressional support for the innovative state programs that enable outreach and education to students to get started in the aviation industry. Management of the federal spectrum policy remains an issue also of high concern for general aviation. In coordination, we look for a long-term solution and replacement of the safety-critical equipment. I thank the committee again for the opportunity to provide the perspective of the vertical flight industry, and I look forward to our work together on these important issues. My full comments are offered for the record, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you, and now turn to Pete Bunce, President and CEO of General Aviation Manufacturers Association. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Larson, and to Ranking Member Garrett Graves, and to Chair DeFazio and Ranking Member Sam Graves. Thanks for holding this hearing. And Chair DeFazio, thank you for your lifelong commitment and career-long commitment to aviation. We're all going to be proud to have you looking down on us with your portrait and making sure we continue on, and we're going to cross the aisle, because this committee has truly been one that has been bipartisan in nature, and that's been so important to our industry and allowing us to be able to thrive as we have. But I'm here to tell you that today I have never seen a time where the manufacturers and maintenance organizations are under such tough times. And you mentioned a few of those in opening remarks. If we look at our workforce, had you and this committee not passed the Aviation Manufacturing Jobs Protection Act during the pandemic, we would have lost a lot of our skilled workforce. And even with that, we're down 20% in virtually every one of our factories in both maintenance technicians, manufacturing technicians, and also engineers. In addition to that, we need some help in the next reauthorization. In the Section 625 grants that you passed in the last reauthorization were focused toward pilots and maintenance professionals. We need that expanded to manufacturing professionals. Workforce is absolutely critical to us. We've also talked about supply chain. And the impact of supply chain on our industry is a little different than other industries because the FAA is so immersed in that process. So it's very difficult to switch out things. Mr. DeFazio, a company in your state, all they did is switch out an LED landing light from one to a new manufacturer. It took them 8 months to get a response from the FAA to be able just to switch out one light bulb for another, and then the FAA told them they were going to have to recertify the system. Fortunately, they changed their mind on that one, but that's what industry is facing right now when we try to go and deal with this supply chain shortage. And also, a lot of our companies are having to spend a lot of their engineering time just trying to source things like chips and that from throughout the industry. But probably the most debilitating thing that I've seen right now, and it's a perfect storm, is really what I'm seeing with the FAA. In my 17 and a half years of doing this, I have never seen us have the bureaucracy grind the industry to almost a halt. And what has happened now it's that perfect storm. You have a lot of the engineers and technical experts at the FAA are brand new to their jobs. 40% have less than 3 years of regulating. Then they're working at home. Now, when they're working at home, they can't collaborate together, they can't talk to one another, so they're sending written notices to each other. That just slows down the process. But worse than anything else is the funnel all goes now to FAA legal. And that funnel is clogged. And a lot of it is self-inflicted wounds. So policy and guidance has virtually stopped coming out of the agency. And we have to have policy and guidance to be able to provide the innovative technical solutions that starts to reduce pilot error, and that equates directly to safety. If you want to improve general aviation safety, you've got to let technology advance, and we can't be having these self-inflicted wounds of everything having to go through the funnel, including very technical standards that legal review doesn't do anything but change glad to happy, add a few commas in there, and put it in legalese language that technical experts don't have a chance to really understand. So it is a true problem that we have out there. Issue resolution is also something very important. You called for that in the last reauthorization. It started to happen before the pandemic. It's virtually died right now. We have to have a process. As I mentioned to this committee before, if you get 5 engineers in the room, you get 7 different opinions because they'll argue with themselves. And we have to have a process where we have a review that moves up the chain. Somebody can make a decision. Now we have very good people that have been put in a very responsible positions within the FAA, but we've got to allow them to make those decisions, feel confident that they can do that. Finally, in the last reauthorization, you talked about the SOCAC and the importance of having industry specialists to advise the FAA on policy that they're doing. The SOCAC virtually has not been active, it hasn't produced anything, and hasn't been tasked with anything. We've got to re-energize that process. We're talking about advanced air mobility. We'll have a chance to talk about that a little more. That technology is dependent upon us being able to get through the system expeditiously, and one of the problems is, right now, with traditional aviation manufacturing being halted by a lot of the processes in the FAA, how are we ever going to have global leadership as we move into this new world? So I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now turn to Tim Ovitz of the National Air Transportation Association. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. And Chair DeFazio, thanks for being a friend to general aviation businesses. You'll be missed, but I'm sure you're going to be around. And thank you, Chair Larson and Ranking Member Graves and the other Ranking Graves for having this opportunity to speak. National Air Transportation members are aviation businesses that serve the general aviation community as FBOs, Part 135, 91K air carriers, MROs, fuel suppliers, flight schools, and fixed-wing aeromedical. The vast majority of these members are small businesses, middle-class Americans who have a passion for aviation and want to serve their communities by providing essential services. These businesses serve as the gateway to their communities, providing vital, once again, essential services to the public. NATA members have, by and large, weathered the storm of COVID, and businesses has increased over pre-COVID levels due to their passion and can-do attitude. I'd like to thank you, this committee, for your tireless efforts in helping many aviation businesses along this uncertain journey through the CARES Act. However, there are warning indicators now that we need to address proactively if we want general aviation to continue to thrive. I'll address these. To be certain, NATA is committed to working with you and your staff as we look forward to the upcoming FAA reauthorization. So the state of general aviation business is simply this. In short, business is up. During COVID, interest in general aviation grew with an increase of new entrants taking flying lessons and more passengers recognizing GA as a means of safe, reliable, secure, and without delay travel. Communities started to recognize the many services GA provides through medical, fire, rescue, emergency, mercy missions, cargo, and passenger travel, as many were cut off from the outside world. General aviation, airports, and aviation businesses serving them became an important lifeline to the community. Even with the uptick, we have not seen a full return of corporate travel. And over the last couple of months, we've seen a flat line to a slight dip in some parts of the country in fuel sales. What are these indicators that are problematic? The cost of insurance for aviation business and pilots have significantly increased, if not doubled. We have a workforce shortage and increase in wages. The selection pool has grown smaller, maybe in part due to the fear of applicants failing drug tests. Cost of training as a pilot or A&P mechanic has increased, and the feeding of the system by our armed forces has slowed. You've heard about the logistics supply chain problems. Difficulty in getting through the red tape to build hangars and making improvement in airports is a real problem. In fact, the cost for improvements to airport and building hangars and other improvements has increased nearly 50%. Delay in receiving parts for maintenance. Antiquated rules and regulations and delays in certification, with over 500 applications currently pending at the FAA as part of their backlog. Workforce shortage and lack of allocated resources at the FAA of the 4,825 members and employees that serve there, with many of the talented and knowledgeable leaving, with more at risk so we have a risk of brain drain at the FAA. We have an attack on airports related to environmental issues, PFAS, 100 low lead, carbon emission, and noise. Efforts by special interest groups to privatize the ATC and make it not readily accessible for all loom on the horizon. Illegal charter competes with legitimate Part 135 and Part 91 air carriers, creating a real safety issue. New technologies like AAM will put demand on the limited space at urban GA airports, and we have to figure out how to integrate. And finally, an aging population of small aviation business owners with limited entrants with the same experience and passion. The upcoming authorization offers an opportunity for us to modernize the FAA and innovate, create efficient programs and wise investments so that general aviation will continue to thrive. I know my friends here on the panel will address ways to modernize as well, and we've already heard some, and we are willing to work with your staff to think with you. We need to foster private enterprise investment into airport infrastructure through hangars and other improvements. We need to invest in the FAA and recruit a capable workforce. We need to enforce the laws you've authorized the FAA to implement and get rid of the antiquated rules and regulations that no longer make sense, that cause a quagmire. We need Congress to invest in sustainability, provide greater support for programs like the FAA Ascent, and speed up the ASTM process as technology and new pathways are discovered. Finally, we need to fund apprenticeship programs for mechanics and line service workers as we try to grow our workforce. I look forward to answering any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'll turn to Greg Pecoraro, President and CEO of National Association of State Aviation Officials. Recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Larson, Chairman DeFazio, Ranking Member.
Try to get that microphone closer to you if you can. Is the microphone on? The light's on.
Yeah, pull the whole thing toward you. Just grab that box.
Grab the table, pull the table towards you. No, it must be not working. That's fine.
Whoa, all right.
It's all gone to heck. Try that.
Go ahead.
Chairman Larson. Yeah. Chairman DeFazio, there we go. Chairman DeFazio, Ranking Member Graves, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Greg Pecoraro, and I represent the National Association of State Aviation Officials, the men and women in state government aviation agencies in all 50 states, Guam, and Puerto Rico. I'm glad to offer a few thoughts on the issues that concern these state aviation professionals as you look towards reauthorization. We appreciate your recognition of the importance of general aviation and its network of 3,000 federally funded airports. Through the Airport Improvement Program, Americans in every part of the nation have an access point to aviation. GA airports are vital to business and personal transportation, public safety and emergency response, agriculture, and just-in-time delivery of important materials, critical parts, and medical supplies. NASAO is grateful for all Congress has done recently to keep the nation's aviation industry alive and to begin rebuilding and improve our aviation infrastructure. But we are here to show you the need for more. Additional funding for AIP is needed to clear the $14 billion backlog of priority AIP-eligible projects needed through 2025 for GA and other non-primary airports. GA airports need these funds for the critical construction and repair of runways, taxiways, and other AIP-eligible projects. Looking forward, GA airports must transform into greener, more sustainable, and more resilient facilities and improve their multimodal connections. Better connections to an improved national electric grid are also vital as airports facilitate electric vehicle charging, ground support equipment, on-airport clean power generation, and LEED-certified facilities. To sustain the existing system and meet future needs, NASAO urges Congress to increase AIP investment by $250 million each year over the next 5 years to a new authorization of $4 billion. GA airports depend on the non-primary entitlement program for a minimal level of capital funding because many often don't receive discretionary funding. Unfortunately, the NPE program hasn't changed since its inception in 2001, so it only provides $150,000 a year. This by itself doesn't cover the cost of nearly any capital projects and has to be accumulated over a period of years to cover the cost of a real pavement project, which today starts around $1 million. In fact, many airports are unable to access these funds because they can't come up with the matching funds, and the unused money goes back to the FAA, where it is often reallocated to commercial airports, contrary to the purpose of the program. If the NPE program is to provide airports real help in making improvements, the program must be updated. NASAO encourages Congress to increase the minimum NPE grant to $250,000 per year and correspondingly increase state apportionment to ensure that an increase in NPE does not further reduce state apportionment funds. Unspent funds should also remain in the state for reallocation to other GA airports. As we prepare for a new era of aviation, GA airports will be the first staging grounds for these emerging technologies. Connecting urban, suburban, and rural areas in a new way that's cleaner, quieter, and more efficient is exciting and can revolutionize how many people will access and use the aviation system, but only if these opportunities are made broadly available across the nation. Before this new era can launch, many questions need to be answered. It's vital that Congress support integration of these new technologies by tasking the FAA with establishing a national standard to address AAM airspace coordination and control. Established standards will enable the system to expand more rapidly as AAM aircraft become certified while maintaining the appropriate level of safety. Federal expectations and rules for this new technology must be developed and shared with all stakeholders soon. And it's critical for state and local governments to be part of the conversation in integrating these technologies into the larger transportation system. Now that you have begun in a serious way to rebuild America's airports, we encourage you to finish the job. Fix the airports we have and begin developing the airports of the future. Increase AIP funding and reform the NPE program. Invest in the future by facilitating the development of aviation infrastructure ready to capitalize on emerging technologies. NASAO appreciates the opportunity to share our views, and we look forward to working with you. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll turn to Ed Boland, President and CEO of National Business Aviation Association. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chairman Larson and Chairman DeFazio. Thank you for all that you have done. As my friend Pete Bunt said, your lifetime of service has made a meaningful difference, and we're grateful for that. And Ranking Member Graves, thank you for your tremendous effort in Tarkio and helping us have an opportunity to see general aviation in action and underscore the fact that bipartisanship allows general aviation to thrive in the United States. And I really want to focus on that because in the opening remarks, you have talked about the importance of general aviation to our nation's job base, the fact that we create a huge number of jobs and provide economic development, particularly in small towns and rural communities. In those large states, we provide access to the world economy, and we're always there for humanitarian efforts. And so I want to thank this committee for the leadership it has shown. You know, the United States is the world leader in all aspects of aviation, but nowhere is that more clear and evident than in general aviation. This committee has been enormously important in our ability to promote general aviation. You have recognized that access to airports and airspace is fundamental to our nation's transportation system and to our economy. In the FAA reauthorization bill that was passed in 2018, you ensured that the public's airspace would be overseen by the public's elected representatives, you. You made sure that we had fair and equal access to airports and airspace and allowed that economic development and the job growth to take place. Fortunately, since that bill was passed, we've achieved a major milestone on the modernization of the ATC system. January 1st, 2020, we moved forward from a ground-based radar system to a satellite-based system, ADS-B, augmented with ground stations. Today, the U.S. has the most robust ADS-B system anywhere in the world. But that did not represent an ending point on our modernization journey. It's simply a milestone. We have got more work to do, but fundamental to that success is ensuring we always have fair and equal access to airports and airspace. I want to touch on a little bit about some of the key points that you have brought forward, and that is our ability to constantly improve the safety of the system. Safety is part of the reason that our system is able to grow and thrive. We have to be safe, and we have to be perceived to be safe. That means that we need to continue to focus on things like the ASIAS program, which general aviation is participating in. It also means we need to use tools like SMS, safety management systems, but to do so in a way that is consistent with operations. Safety management systems are an important tool, but they have to be scalable and they have to be usable, and that's a key part as we move forward. I also want to point out that Congress has historically recognized that getting on a general aviation aircraft should not mean giving up your right to privacy. What we've seen since passage of the last FAA Reauthorization Act is we have privacy ICAO addresses and programs that limit aircraft data displays. But technology is moving fast, and we need to move faster to make sure that there is a right to privacy reflected in those movements. We also see that technology is coming together in new and different ways. We saw that with the rollout of 5G. I think that there are important conversations that are taking place between this committee, the FAA, and the telecoms. I think we are moving through finding balances, but that we need to be very vigilant about that. Also talking about the new technologies, it's been touched on a great deal by everyone, that we have advanced air mobility coming forward, this ability to use distributed electric propulsion to get people where they need to be, when they need to be there. Congress and this committee introduced legislation and passed legislation to advance this advanced air mobility industry with planning and construction grants. We want to do more, and we want to do better. And then finally, let me underscore the importance of workforce development. In the last FAA authorization bill, you called for the Women in Aviation Advisory Board. You created a youth task force at the FAA, and clearly we all recognize that in order for us to go forward, those recommendations have to be made real. We need to recruit the best and the brightest to our industry, and there are underrepresented parts of our society in the aviation workforce. That needs to be a priority as we move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Bolin. Now turn to member questions, and we'll start with Chair of the full committee, Representative DeFazio. You're recognized.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to everyone for their testimony. Mr. Bunce, I got to say, you sounded a lot like me when you were talking about the FAA bureaucracy. I just, there's some people who've raised issues. Phil Washington doesn't have a tremendous amount of aviation experience. What that place needs is a manager, and this guy is a manager. I mean, the things he did with LA Metro, the innovative stuff, the tunnel boring, the subways, amazing things, on time, under budget. I'm looking forward to someone who will actually shake that agency up. I mean, when Administrator Dixon came in, we had this conversation, but unfortunately, I'd say he kind of got sidelined by COVID, and then obviously all the problems with Boeing and the MAX, and he really didn't get to do the things he had intended to do in terms of unstovepiping that agency and unclogging the plumbing. The comments about the legal were really interesting, and that should be fairly easy to deal with. I mean, why does technical data have to go through legal? And I'll certainly be bringing that up with Mr. Washington when I talk to him later this week, prior to his hopeful, approval by the Senate. So, thanks for that. It's always good to, and I'm going to ask him to sit down with you too, because I think, and with all of you, in fact, as a group, to hear about these things. Now, Mr. Bolin, the 5G issue, I just spent quite a bit of time talking to Acting Administrator Nolan yesterday about this issue, and I fear we're not really quite resolved yet on this issue as we move forward. I mean, We don't have an agreement on permanent measures yet. And, you know, I'm sure a lot of your members are struggling with, you know, trying to get, you know, the filters or the new altimeters or whatever they're going to need. I know there's a fear that you're going to have to do it twice. I raised that with him. You know, we need to know what the longer term is going to be with these new, you know, all the entrants are coming. We've already got, you know, the big entrants. Now we got a whole bunch of other entrants coming in. And other countries have adopted measures that we need to adopt, and I want you to all help us advocate for it with, you know, with permanent areas of protection, lower power, deflection of antennas, and other things that will not cripple this industry. It'll still be allowed to provide the service, but it's doable. It's being done in other countries. We should be able to do it here. Unfortunately, we've created the Wild West when it comes to the FCC and the deregulation of the industry, and nowhere else in the world have they allowed that. So those really aren't questions, but they're a couple of observations. If anybody wants to opine on those a little bit for a minute, I've got 2 minutes left. Ed, do you want to go ahead?
You're exactly right about the situation related to 5G. We have a temporary situation, but we have permanent challenges. And working together, I think we are encouraged that the Telcom and the FAA have shared a lot of data. We've learned a lot more, but we're at a situation where we've got to find ways to move forward on a permanent basis. And the power, the direction, all of those things have proven to be effective. And I think you're right, we need to move from temporary agreements to permanent solutions that do facilitate the benefits of safe aviation operations and the benefits inherent in state-of-the-art network systems.
Chair DeFazio, I would only add, though, that this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is going to happen again and very soon. So our GPS is going to be interfered with. You're very familiar with the Legato situation. Yep. But as spectrum becomes more precious and they start being adjacent to our spectrum, our systems take so long to certify, it's going to happen again. And really, if you look at what NTIA did not do in the process, the FAA told them this was going to happen, but it was like they were shouting in the woods and nobody was listening, and there was no coordination between the FCC and FAA. So if we can do anything in government is to start getting these agencies to work together, and I know that's going to take Commerce Committee involvement and Senate Commerce and everything, but we have got to be able to solve the spectrum issue because it's going to happen again and again.
A good observation. I did have a good conversation with the current chair of the FCC, and she recognized the fact that the lack of coordination that went on under the last administration, and is committed to doing better, but it would be better if we could have a formal MOU or something else between these agencies, which will be something that we have to deal with the Commerce Committee on. So thank you for those observations.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to move to Representative Graves for 5 minutes. Before I do, just an update on votes. It's now looking to be 11:30 to 11:45 when votes are called, just for members' awareness. With that, Representative Graves of Louisiana for 5 minutes. Sorry. Okay. What I meant to say, Representative Graves of Missouri for 5 minutes. I get them, like you, I get them mixed up all the time.
We look so much alike. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd ask unanimous consent that my opening statement be included in the record.
Without objection.
One thing I didn't hear about today was the success of Basic Med and how that's impacted the pilot community. And I know we've got some 70,000 pilots that have taken advantage of it, and safety has been hasn't been compromised. And the question is probably more for Mr. Baker, but I encourage anybody to chime in. You might, for the benefit, because I know a lot of us worked on that, and it was implemented back in 2017, but we got new members on the committee. You might just briefly explain the impact it's had on general aviation community and what we might be able to do to expand it for that matter.
Thanks, Sam. That it has been one of the biggest wins in general aviation in the last 50 years. 70,000 people jumping into that in the last 5 years. We did the safety look back, no discernible difference between that and third-class medical at all. It zero from a safety perspective. If anything, I think it's an opportunity to revisit it and look at how can we expand it. People have been safely flying up to 5 passengers in these aircraft around the country. We are working hard to get Canada to receive basic med as an alternative medical crossing the border. We've got it done in Bahamas and Mexico now and most of the Caribbean. So the opportunity to take another look at it, say how this has been really a successful program to lower the cost, having pilots work with their own doctors to find out what they need to do to make sure they make the decisions every day before they fly, that they are safe to fly with ACT conditions or whatever they have. And I am really proud of this bipartisan event that occurred and was signed into law in 2016 and has resoundingly, for certain, improved the value of aircraft and the access to these 5,000 airports in a big way.
I think that now's a good time to tie that to workforce development as well, because there's people that knew how hard it was to get through the medical process. And now with knowing that they could do basic med to get things started and get involved in aviation, so I think it even helps there as well.
That was the one thing that I wanted to point out, and something I'm going to be working with some of the newer members to explain it to them and why it's so important and what it's done to impact and help when it comes to a lot of those pilots that just simply kind of faded away, and now they've come back. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, gentleman. Yields back. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. First question I have is for Mr. Rosansky regarding AIP funding to meet infrastructure needs. Specifically, have you all looked at how advanced air mobility infrastructure needs will impact the investment decisions that airports will be making?
Thank you, Chair Larson. Yes, we have taken a preliminary look at how advanced air mobility may impact our long-term capital planning. At this point, however, there's more questions than answers. There's even several AAM developers working very closely throughout the state of Florida. And with our close proximity to urban centers like Miami, Fort Lauderdale, we believe we'll see some early adoption. But the electrical grid infrastructure remains the biggest single question mark. What sort of voltage needs are there? What qualifications do the personnel on the ground need to have? Are they going to be replaceable battery packs, or do aircraft have to sit on the ground charging? Do you need more ramp space? So we have started to contemplate those needs, but without clear standards on the development of vertiports yet from the FAA, which they are moving in that direction. They've issued an engineering brief here lately, although I understand an advisory circular on vertiport design may not come about until 2024, if I recall correctly. So we're eagerly awaiting that guidance and talking to some of the developers of these systems, but I think it's still a bit of an evolutionary process.
Yeah, thank you. I would note that Representative Davids and Representative Graves are co-sponsors of the bill to develop some coordinating council, and then Representative Graves and I are co-sponsors of the bill on planning and infrastructure with a lot of support from folks. Both have passed the House and again waiting on the Senate to act. But we are trying to push these issues forward because I think we need to begin the planning. So, Mr. Pecoraro, same question for you from the aviation official side, on the public side. How are you all thinking about infrastructure specific to AAM? Yeah, I'm sorry about that. We'll get the microphone fixed, the break, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Mr. Rosansky said, I think that a lot of the challenges right now that we face at the state and local level on this is knowing what the standards are going to be. Is there going to be, just like with charging your cell phone, is there going to be one standard for charging, or are there going to be multiple different types of attachments that people are going to need to be able to charge various types of aircraft? It's important for the FAA to come forward with that kind of standard, a lot of other types of standards like that to be able to make that case. States can't plan, airports can't plan, local airport sponsors can't plan unless they know what all these technical standards are going to be. So we very much appreciate the work that you've done in trying to push this forward and make some of these funds available. When the standards are available, we'll be able to start making those kinds of plans because it's coming very rapidly, as you know.
Yeah, one of those issues where we'd hope the FAA may not be able to be ahead of the technology, but at least be closer to where the technology is as compared to the experience we had with UAS.
And I would just say that the FAA's new Office of AAM and UAS is, I think, working hard on these issues, and they're doing a good job of reaching out to states these days to try and incorporate us into the conversation, but things have to move a little faster.
Sure. Thank you. Mr. Bunce, I could probably ask anyone here on the panel this question about this relationship between the desired investment in SAF or sustainable aviation fuel and the leaded fuel issue within GA. Is there a nexus here between GA's adoption of, or as we move forward on Eagle and SAF? How are you all thinking about that as equipment manufacturers?
Well, Chair Larson, I think there is a nexus. We're learning more as we dive into this. And actually, my colleague, Tim Obis, went out to NREL just recently, and we're hearing some very promising things that there may be the feedstocks of waste products that are out there to be able to convert methane into an aviation gasoline for piston aircraft. And obviously, we know that has a lot of nexus with sustainable aviation fuel. So the more that we get in, and that's why Eagle is so important, and we're all partners in this, is because the more we see all the tentacles, we know how complicated it is, but we're starting to be able to tap into things like the Department of Energy, who has vast resources that want to help us with SAF, but also maybe now with leaded fuel.
That's great. Thank you. And I'll turn to the other Representative Graves, from Louisiana for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, now that Ranking Member Sam Graves is here, I want to reiterate what I said earlier. I do appreciate the Ranking Member hosting us over the weekend and pulling the aviation panel together. That was remarkable. I do have to question his judgment flying a 1940s aircraft upside down, but whatever. Yeah, that's right. With a slight hydraulic problem, but I also want to apologize to all of you. We had a Natural Resources Committee markup that is scheduled during this time that I'm quite certain was done intentionally, but it's not going to stop me from offering amendments. So I apologize for having to depart earlier and unfortunately again later today. My good friend Chairman Grahova. In any case, Colonel, thanks again for being here. Back in May at the emissions hearing, we talked a little bit about some of the changes that the FAA has made in the certification process for advanced air mobility aircraft. I wanted to ask you, could you talk a little bit about collaboration with the FAA and industry on their efforts now on the special federal aviation regulation, the SFAR that they're doing now? Can you talk about just collaboration with you or with industry on the development of the SFAR?
If we go back, Chair Graves, a few years, we went for 5 years trying to certify basically an airplane that had a vertical takeoff capability. And we had begged the FAA for the last 3 years of that process to codify it, to write it down to a procedure. And as the last administrator left, the decision was made to change the way we're going to certify these aircraft. That was a very non-transparent process, but what I will say now is that they've come to us and said, we want transparency, we want to work with industry, and so they sent a team over. We got all the companies that are in AAM together to be able to listen to what they had to say from both flight standards and CERT, and then then they tasked us to come back with them with a very detailed, this is what needs to be in this SFAR, which is a basic rulemaking, to be able, and it's an aggressive schedule. They got to get it done now. They've committed to the end of 2024, and we know that the FAA is very behind on rulemaking, so it is aggressive. We're going to submit that along with HAI and our other sister associations to the FAA this week, but the importance in this process will be twofold. One is that they keep the collaboration and the communications open with industry through the process, and they don't go into ex parte where they won't talk to us. And there's ways that legal can allow them to do that by putting things on the docket. But probably more important to me is that They listen to you. They listen to Congress. And if you hold their feet to the fire on getting this SFAR done, you ask the questions, ask for progress reports, and let them know this is very important. We don't lose in the process. We do know that when they shifted gears, the UK and Brazil now went with EASA. They went with the Europeans in their form. So unless we get this right, our chance for global leadership in this area is gone.
Thank you. Raises very strong concerns about some of the uncertainty there. Mr. Boland, I want to thank you for some of your input. And over the weekend, we heard kind of thematically feedback from many folks about just concerns about the FAA, about lack of decision-making, lack of leadership, and what I would probably refer to as just kind of inept management over there. I wanted to ask from your perspective, your members, the lack of certification, the lack of regulations, and just the lack of decision-making. Can you talk about how that's affecting some of the folks that you represent?
Well, I think as has been pointed out, there are a lot of new people in their position at the FAA, and what we are hoping is that people quickly establish command of the issues and the processes, and find ways that we can embrace new technologies, new processes, so that we can constantly advance the state of safety, and finding ways to do so that are thoughtful, thorough, but are able to yield real safety benefits. I know there are countless examples, and we talked about many of those in Tarkios. One of the things that I think is important for our industry has been high altitude supplementary oxygen. We have a petition for rulemaking that is in, and I think that's a good example of how frustratingly long the rulemaking process is. We put in a petition. It may lead to rulemaking. It may take years, but we have an opportunity with new technologies to increase compliance, to increase safety, and to solve a lot of the challenges that we have. You know, one of the benefits of business aviation is a lot of times we can fly above the rest of the traffic, and this would help us be able to do that more efficiently and effectively.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I have questions for some of the other panel members, but I'll be submitting those for the record. Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you very much. We'll now recognize, Chair will recognize Representative Davids of Kansas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Larson, and thank you to Ranking Member Graves for holding this hearing. I think you're getting my note right now. So I was fortunate enough to host Chairman Larson in my district last week, just before Ranking Member Graves' Tarkio Air Show. I'm sorry I missed you guys there. And we had an aviation roundtable, actually, and we had an opportunity to hear from quite a few local and national stakeholders from the general aviation community about the workforce, needed federal investment, and challenges that folks are facing right now. And one of those issues, and actually this kind of dovetails on what we were just talking about a second ago, one of those issues is that of aircraft and equipment certification, international validations with folks like EASA. And, you know, of course, we have a thriving aerospace supplier network in Kansas City, including Garmin, and their businesses are unquestionably have been hampered with these validation hangups and in discussion and negotiation. So I'm curious, you know, of course, we've established relationships with a lot of regulating authorities for the sole purpose of expediting these types of certifications with some reciprocity. And so I'm curious about the slowdown. Mr. Bunce, I was hoping that maybe if you could share a little bit, not just about why you think we're seeing these bottlenecks, because I know we've heard a little bit about that, but also if there's something that you think that we should be doing there or can be doing.
Vice Chair Davids, we are seeing it in both directions. So we have these bilateral safety agreements. The one that's talked about the most is between us and the Europeans, but we have them with the UK, we've got Brazil, and Canada. The industry, our industry is global, so we have to be able to validate products back and forth. But as we went through all the difficulties with the MAX it really made validation a lot tougher. And what our perspective is that, of course, the leadership at the FAA and EASA and the European Commission all say, hey, we trust the bilateral, we trust each other's safety competencies, but when it gets down to the technicians and validating the products, that's not happening. And there's some reciprocity between the organizations that if we ask a lot of questions about how EASA certified a program, then the European technicians do the exact same thing. And it's bogging down the process. We're talking years now that it's taking to validate products. And then if you don't see this cooperation and a work plan that's built up front, then you have problems with other countries, such as with Canada, which is not working well at all. So we had an agreement with the Europeans that produced a work plan up front. That's not being followed. The work plan's not happening. There's also an office that you called for in the last reauthorization to be able to man up the validation office in the FAA. That's very slow to mature right now, and they need training. So right now, validation is not working very well in any direction.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And also appreciate all of the work that all of you are doing. I do want to just mention, it's been discussed a bit, the efforts that we're making and that you all are making around general aviation, the advancements, can have such a big impact on economic development, and I know folks have already been, Mr. Baker, you brought that up earlier, and I have seen it at home. I was just at the Miami County Airport in Kansas, and an extension of the runway there would allow for additional economic development that would be good for the entire region. Their hangars have a long waiting list. There are a couple of businesses there that have they don't even advertise, and they have a year out wait to get some of their customers serviced. So I just appreciate the work you guys are doing around that. And with that, I'll yield back, Chairman.
Thank you. Recognize Representative Massey of Kentucky for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bunce, at first I wasn't sure as an engineer how to take your comment that if you put 5 engineers in a room, you get 7 answers, but I've decided that you're just characterizing them as overachievers, and I don't need any further comment on that. But you did elucidate several of the problems that are facing general aviation today. I want to give you a chance to offer some solutions. I know you've already mentioned some already, but if there's some other solutions that we might take into consideration, please give them to us.
Well, thank you, Mr. Massey, and our mutual friend Dan Swin, I'm sure would be agreeable to the disagreement between engineers and that.
Well, if one of the 5 engineers is from MIT, just take his answer.
There you go.
Okay.
But one of the solutions I think is, you can't fix it unless you measure it. And what we're seeing in some of the aircraft certification offices out there is before pre-pandemic, we got response time from the FAA down to about 30 days on the average. We have one ACO that just told the company it's now 120 days before we're going to get back to you on when we go and put an issue paper forward, and they have to respond to it. Now, 120 days. Think about that. 4 months, how can we as industry deal with something like that? Because you've got a burn rate because you're not selling any product while you're trying to develop it. And just to get this back and forth answer, whether it's 90 days or 120 days. So what we can do, more resources for them, but also try to cut down this response time and be able to say, okay, are you measuring it, FAA? We want to report back to this committee on what you're doing to fix that. And a lot of it is processes. And I think, if the new administrator is confirmed there, that's one thing we hope he takes on as a task, is looking at his processes across the agency and saying, okay, how can we right this ship and get this flight path corrected so that we can help industry innovate? Because innovation relates directly to safety.
I think in a couple years, you're going to look like a prophet talking about the spectrum issue and mentioning that there are going to be further conflicts that are going to come up. I mean, it's inevitable. The value of the spectrum, if you look at the prices at the auctions, have increased by 2 orders of magnitude since the 80s and the 90s when these systems were first developed. And our ability, engineering-wise, to segment that spectrum has increased by an order of magnitude. Can you tell us where some of the other collisions you think are going to happen? Not arbitrary. I mean, these are driven by the markets and by the value of the spectrum, but you mentioned another one, GPS, that might occur?
Yes, sir. You know, if you think about GPS satellite, I think it's operating at a very low wattage rate. It's 210 watts or whatever. So it's like a light bulb out in space. So it takes very little to overwhelm our receivers. And receivers, you know, we may have, in both the airlines and civil aviation, we may have a receiver that was one of the earlier generations of GPS versus some of the later ones where the filters are not as good. So once they start transmitting right next to our spectrum, they're going to interfere, and then we're going to have to spend a lot of money, or we'll be regulated from certain type of approaches if we don't get that fixed. Now, one thing that the satellite receiver folks got through the big sale of the spectrum, I think it was $80 billion sale, was part of it was compensation for them to help migrate away so that they wouldn't have the impact from the 5G. And I think as we look to sale of spectrum, which you're exactly right, is precious, and we want the U.S. to move forward. This is we're not trying to fight that, but if it's going to affect us in aviation, which takes years and years to certify a new product, is there a way to compensate that and think ahead of time so we can have the widgets available to be able to have a rapid plug-in to new aircraft or existing aircraft, but also have a way to help compensate folks that have to do that?
I'm going to give other folks a chance to answer this question. We know there's a shortage of chips, and that's affecting general aviation. Are there shortages of other things that people could let us know about that are going to affect GA?
Member
Mr.
Massey, if I may, regarding workforce, the contract tower program is suffering from a significant shortage of viable workforce, some of which, culmination of factors, some of which driven by recruitment to the FAA staff towers. Secondly, the wages are out of alignment with Department of Labor, and I know there's been effort on this subcommittee, which we greatly appreciate. So some controllers are making difficult financial decisions, best for them and their families, and the Contract Act would go a long way towards helping those efforts. Coordination with the FAA on a transition of a recruitment from a contract tower, backfill vacancies, go to the FAA would help a great deal. It's all part of one NAS.
Thank you. My time's expired. It wasn't the answer I anticipated, but it was a good answer. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Now turn to Representative Johnson of Georgia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and thank you to all of the witnesses for your time and for your testimony. Lead is a neurotoxin with harmful developmental effects in children. Over 25 years ago, lead was banned from all road vehicles due in part to the severe health consequences of lead exposure. Today, aviation fuel for piston engine aircraft is our country's main and primary source of lead emissions, and the link between piston engine aircraft and blood lead levels have never been stronger. Recent research shows a correlation between high levels of lead in children's blood in relation to proximity to airports. We've heard testimony today about the Joint Government and Industry Eliminate Aviation Gasoline Lead Emissions, or EAGLE initiative, which would remove lead from piston engine aircraft fuel by 2030. The EAGLE initiative is long overdue and is critical to reducing lead exposure to all Americans. Mr. Bunce, are you and the manufacturers you represent confident that the EAGLE initiative will succeed?
Yes, sir. We are confident.
At last month's stakeholder meeting, what progress was discussed? And were any concerns raised about the program, the initiative?
I thought that we were able to really get an organizational structure in place that allows very good cooperation between the industry associations, the pillar leads of the 4 pillars that we have in the EAGLE initiative, 2 of which are industry-led, 2 of which are FAA-led. And the collaboration and actually the ability to be able to go toward a certification of a fuel. Remember, the FAA's never done this. We certified engines to operate on a fuel. The FAA has never certified an actual fuel, but I think my colleagues would agree the last meeting set the stage for us to be able to explore improved avenues to be able to accelerate the process to get to testing so we can do what's called a fleet-wide approval of a fuel or multiple fuels that can satisfy the entire fleet.
Thank you. Helicopter air ambulances fly at low altitudes and fly in and around communities with potentially high 5G traffic. Mr. Viola, how has 5G interference impacted helicopter operations since the 5G rollout began?
Congressman, thank you for that question. We worked hand in hand with our operators, and we've actually put in an exemption, especially on the air ambulance providers, because we knew that they couldn't be shut down. So there's some additional risk mitigations that we had to address in order to operate without those radar altimeters in that area. Other than that, there are some areas that we're working through, and I think as you heard earlier today, the goal is to not have to continually do retrofits, but actually come up with policies and procedures that will enable us to do one-time fixes and then work on the spectrum issues with policy again to make sure that it's not that we're playing catch-up in the aviation industry with safety concerns, but that we're laying a safe future as we bring in this future technology.
Thank you. Mr. Bunce, are there any actions that you recommend Congress to take to ensure success of the Eagle Initiative?
I think, sir, showing interest from this committee on progress would be very beneficial and helpful to us. And I know you all care about this as we do. And so just continually pulsing the FAA, but also encouraging the FAA to work very closely with other federal agencies, like I mentioned earlier, the Department of Energy and others, to be able to help us find a solution would be very beneficial to us.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions and I yield back.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Representative Mast of Florida for 5 minutes. Representative Mast.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bunce, obviously everybody likes you, but you could throw me in that lot as well. I like you as well. Good to see you here today. You know, I wanted to talk to you all a little bit about the flavor of the summer. I guess I would call it the flavor of the summer. Any of us that have flown, we've all felt the delays, whether it's for weather, whether it's because of, you know, those that are in the towers and the shortages there, whether it's pilot shortages, we felt it. But I think we touched on it just a couple of questions ago. What's going on in the towers? It was touched upon, you know, competitive wages. It was touched upon, you know, the shortages there. I just want to hear a little bit more about how general aviation is affected by the shortages in the towers, the contract towers and otherwise. Whoever might be the best person to discuss that, I'd be curious to hear a little bit more on that.
Well, this is Ed Bolin with the National Business Aviation Association. I think it's inherent for the broad aviation community to constantly work and communicate what the needs on the system are. And clearly, staffing has been a front burner issue in several press stories, whether it's staffing at airports, in control towers with various airline operations. That has been a big challenge as we as a community went through the pandemic and trying to come back in terms of that. There are programs in place that we can try to leverage to minimize operations, increase efficiencies. We've got a dual AFP program that we are using in places. So I think there are opportunities there, and we have had, particularly in Florida, important meetings that have taken place in Jacksonville to explore those opportunities and to continue the dialogue. But you're touching on something that is really important. Staffing, workforce issues are a challenge throughout the industry. It came up earlier that there were supply chain issues the workforce issues are every bit as pressing and deserve a great deal of attention.
No, thank you. I appreciate your comments. It is something that we all feel, and I know it's felt in different segments. I would just point out this. I think it's something for us to discuss, certainly as committee and subcommittee more broadly. You mentioned moving off of COVID, moving from COVID. Understanding of it is right now is that FAA is still requiring a 10-day quarantine for people testing positive with COVID. And the CDC guidelines, as an example, I want to say is half that from when your symptoms end. So that's, right there, that's a staffing issue. It doesn't solve everything, but it's certainly a piece of it. We should also be looking at as well, the individuals that are being moved on from government service because of an unwillingness for any hosts of rightful reasons to not get a COVID vaccine. If that's affecting the FAA workforce as well, that's something that we should be looking at as well, making sure that individuals are not being kicked out of government, whether it be the military or the FAA or any other government agency for choosing to not get a vaccine. I think that's something we should be looking at as well. And that, Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions, and I yield the remainder.
Well, thank you, Representative Mast. At this point, recognize Representative Payne for 5 minutes. Representative Payne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank Ranking Member Graves for having this committee hearing today. Let's see, Mr. Baker, in your testimony, you mentioned that the commercial aviation industry will need 600,000 new pilots over the next 20 years. AOPA's website estimates that it costs between $6,000 and $12,000 to earn your initial pilot certificate. It can cost thousands more to earn a commercial pilot certificate. How can we as Congress make sure that this cost is not a barrier to producing the pilots we need for the general aviation sector?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, we're recognize that fuel costs have gone up, and the basic license, as you said, is between $8,000 and $12,000 at a minimum today for an average student. Now, we also believe that a lot of the simulator work that can be accomplished is a real positive, and there is movement to get more of those credits put forth. But as you also recognize, to get all the way to a commercial license with the hours of 1,500 hours is a very expensive proposition. Now, in part to that is that there's a big need for flight instructors. The flight instructors are making a reasonable wage today, and for those that have the ability and the consciousness to be a flight instructor, there's a good opportunity there. But maybe there is a potential that we have to look at. How are we going to finance or allow loans or some other ways to get these young people and access to get to those very highly experienced levels that make them safe pilots and good pilots that we need to consider.
Okay, how can we as Congress make sure that this cost, also, given its diversity of aircraft within the aviation community, does the cost to train some aircraft differ than the cost of training for other aircraft? And does this impact those from lower income situations?
It certainly does. The unmanned part of this thing can be a lot lower cost for certain, but we don't know exactly where that's headed to when you start to have unmanned carried passengers and where that's all going to lead to and what kind of certifications that are going to be required. That's something that we need to work closely with the FAA and the regulator on to figure out what is the standard that's going to be required at some future date when that becomes a reality. But I would tell you that I believe that the numbers that Boeing continues to print out there, which is 600,000 pilots for just the airline world in the next 10 or 15 years, is a really big number, and we are not at a level we can support that level of accreditation. We don't have enough designated pilot examiners today. We have 700 and some examiners. We need 1,500 examiners from the FAA, and it's been really a slow move to get that up to a number that I think is going to help us get to 50,000 pilots a year that this country needs to produce.
Okay.
And I would like to add that, to answer that question also, when you talk about the different cost of certification for pilots, when you look at the rotorcraft community, it is going to be a little more expensive than the airline or the airplane. So as you look at funding for 141 schools and such, make sure that any limitations that you put on there may affect the actual aircraft that they're getting qualified in.
And Mr. Owens here for NETA, with regard to the eligibility, we're hearing from our flight schools that they're having issues related to student loans and also use of GI bills. So that should be looked at as well.
Thank you. Mr. Bunce, we're expecting a similar demand for trained aircraft mechanics in the future that we're expecting as for pilots. What are your members doing to help train the next generation of aircraft manufacturers and mechanics?
Well, Member Payne, we're extremely supportive of the efforts that our colleagues at AOPA, EAA, and our other associations are doing to build a pilot workforce. But also, if we make advanced air mobility happen, that is going to be a feeder for the airlines, because these pilots will be able to fly in what's called Part 135 type of operation. So they'll need a commercial ticket, but they can use that flight time that they mature in advanced air mobility to be able to go and build up to the 1,500-hour rule. So we consider advanced air mobility a real enhancer to aviation. Also, if you think about an electric aircraft as a trainer, where you're doing a lot of the basic work of just landing and taking off, if you can do that much more cheaply with an electric motor, you reduce costs dramatically.
Oh, thank you. And my time is up. Yes. I yield back.
Thank you very much. The chair recognizes Representative Balderson of Ohio for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Bunce, thank you for being here today. And I also want to talk about the supply chain issues you described in your testimony. I'm going to go back to a question that Mr. Massey asked. Didn't get the answer, but he had a great answer about workforce development. But on the semiconductor issue, does this really factor into the general aviation supply issue? And can you expand on the importance of these chips play in general aviation and why it's crucial we expand our domestic production?
Absolutely, sir. I spoke to one company in North Dakota the other day. So their chip sourcing went from a chip that was basically a $7.50 chip to now over $780 per chip. And this is for a piece of equipment that they sell, that a lot of us use in our aircraft here, that only sells for about $2,800. So think about a chip that costs that much, and he absolutely refuses. You know, he's having to suck it up instead of putting a $700 surcharge. What other companies are having to do is they're having to take chips and put their engineering teams onto being able to modify the boards to work with a different type of chip, but then that has to go back through the FAA processes. And not only that, but then the aircraft manufacturer has to certify that wherever that chip came from, that they have the quality control processes to be able to have it go into an aircraft. The automotive industry doesn't have those restrictions. So it is a true problem, and having more chips available here in the U.S., I think, is a national strategic priority.
Thank you. Great answer, and I couldn't agree with you more. And there was a letter sent off by the Commerce Secretary and Secretary Austin today too. So it talked about those same issues. So thank you very much for that answer. Mr. Bunce, today it was announced that consumer price index hit 9.1%. What impact has this record inflation had on the general aviation manufacturing industry?
Sorry, I didn't hear you well. You're talking about the inflation rate and the impact on the industry?
Yeah, I apologize. I can do it. Yeah, just, you know, the rate hit 9.1 today. What has this record inflation rate had on the general aviation, you know, manufacturing industry overall?
It's tremendous. And remember, the lead lag in taking orders and fulfilling that orders at a certain cost point, when your suppliers now, as you're building, and we have what's called a book-to-bill ratio that's out there about 2.5 years. So as you're accepting aluminum or fiber and everything, you're having to pay this increased inflationary cost in addition to having to pay increased labor costs, but you're still made a contractual price to your customer. So it's reducing the margins that our manufacturers have out there, and eventually, for the next orders that they take, you have to start passing those increases along. So it is having a big impact.
All right, thank you very much for your answers. And Mr. Chairman, I will yield back my remaining time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Just a heads up, the floor, they've called votes on the floor just now, so we will continue with questions. And sorry, can't see that far. We'll go with Congresswoman Norton, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Viola, as one of the chairs of the Quiet Skies Caucus, I am particularly concerned with the effects of helicopter noise on the lives of my constituents here in the District of Columbia. Helicopter noise is a major concern, not only in my jurisdiction, but in the National Capital Region. What steps do you believe the Federal Aviation Administration and helicopter operators should take to reduce helicopter noise?
Thank you for that question. And whether the helicopter, today or tomorrow, we're talking about AAM, and I mentioned earlier the society good that vertical flight brings to society with the emergency air ambulance and others. And we understand that we do need that community compatibility. And so we do offer the Fly Neighborly initiative, which is a voluntary noise reduction program as we continue to work with communities such as yours. And then as part of that, we look to the stakeholders to see what we can do, how we can operate with a reduced noise footprint. Of course, the future aircraft have that promise, and we look forward to keeping open the ability to operate inside the cities today as we get that future technology that will enable us to operate even more quietly and more friendly. But as in June, we were down here with the Eastern Region Helicopter Council, and we introduced the new noise initiative for Washington, D.C. We established a noise complaint system for individuals in and around the region to share their concerns. HAI and the Eastern Region Helicopter Committee aim to work with the D.C. community to review and process the noise complaints and then use this data to help mitigate the noise. Using available flight tracking data, we'll be able to accurately identify aircraft that are participating or not participating in some of the measures that we're trying to work with you and other government officials with to try to focus that increased community compatibility. So just flying safely in compliance is not enough. We want to be neighborly, and we hope with the advancements of the technology that are coming, we'll continue to get safer so we can continue to use vertical flight into the cities in the future. And you've heard some of the other panel members here with the technology, with the electric aircraft and others that will come, so that we keep access is very key at this point.
Thank you, that's useful. Continuing with you, the Government Accountability Office conducted a study of helicopter noise in the National Capital Region and recommended that the Federal Aviation Administration develop a mechanism to exchange information with all helicopter operators in the National Capital Region. Now, I understand the Helicopter Association International and the Eastern Region Helicopter Council, in cooperation with the FAA, are doing a test of such a mechanism this summer. How will the information gathered by this mechanism aid in the reduction of helicopter noise in the National Capital Region?
Yes, ma'am. Thanks for that question. I think that as you asked as well, is it's a test program. We're looking to make sure that we correlate the noise issues that are coming in and the locations and the aircraft. And then that's when we'll use the technology to see if there's a way based on what aircraft, when, and locations, and we are working with the FAA and other agencies to make sure that we can get a clear picture of what is going on today, and then plan a future and work with the community to continue to increase the compatibility.
Mr. Rozansky, I want to thank you for bringing up aircraft noise in your testimony, which negatively impacts the lives of our constituents. It affects their sleep, health, and quality of life. The 2021 FAA Neighborhood Environmental Survey indicated individual and community annoyance with aircraft noise has considerably increased. Could I ask you what tangible actions can FAA and airports take to engage with their communities to reduce aircraft noise and aircraft noise annoyance?
Thank you, Member Norton. That is a topic I cited extensively in my complete written testimony. The Naples Airport Authority has been an industry leader in noise abatement efforts. We're currently in the midst of our fourth Part 150 noise study, in part as a result of the dramatic growth in private jet activity that we've seen, but because so many who come to our community are seeking that quality of life you refer to. So it is a balance amongst all the stakeholders. We certainly strive to preserve and promote a healthy and robust aviation system with providing great access to and from our community, but while also protecting the quality of life of the folks who live nearby the airport.
Thank you for your comments.
I'm sorry, Chair?
The time's expired.
Oh, my apologies.
Thank you, Congresswoman Norton. We're going to now turn to Representative Nels for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses who have testified here today. Mr. Bolin, eVTOL aircraft will provide a quiet alternative to conventional aircraft. Companies like Lilium, beautiful picture here, something from the Jetsons. Companies like Lilium have announced that they will sell their eVTOL aircraft to individuals and businesses, allowing general and business aviation to reap these benefits. What should the FAA be doing to prepare the eVTOL aircraft to join the general aviation fleet?
Well, the eVTOL have an enormous promise for our nation and for the world. They will enable us to take the next step in on-demand air mobility, getting people where they want to be when they need to be there, and doing it safely, securely, and sustainably. I think a lot of us at this table recognize that a lot of times in aviation, some of the most unpredictable part of that is getting from a city center to an airport. So this will complement the airline and business aviation as we move forward. We also have an opportunity, particularly here in the United States, where we have over 5,000 public use airports, to have an opportunity to ensure that that infrastructure, which has been so invaluable to growing general aviation, is able to serve the eVTOL community. I think we've already talked about at some length the certification issues that we have challenges with and are working through. As we begin to see the introduction into service, we're going to need to look at the operations, and that will include airport operations, vertiport operations, but also air traffic operations, and making sure that the FAA, the community, is all coming together to understand what challenges we have and what opportunities we have, making sure we get this right. Because as you take the technology industry and the aviation industry, if we can bring the best of both together, we're going to have a safe, secure, sustainable industry that is going to provide enormous benefits for all of humankind.
Thank you. That's good news. Great to hear. Mr. Baker, we have all read or personally experienced the delays in commercial flights ongoing throughout the nation. Can you detail some of the efforts the FAA has taken recently to address the air traffic controller shortage? If you give me 1 minute, because I have one more question.
So the issue about all of air traffic control, all workforce is really real, in my opinion. And that's one of the reasons we kicked off this 4-year high school program. Starts in the 9th grade, goes to the 12th grade. 12,000 kids took it this last year. As we look forward to the registrations this year, we'll be in 45 states in over 500 high schools. And I believe the objective should be, we should be in 1 out of every 10 high schools. We should be at 2,500 high schools with a free education program to show pathways in aviation, including controlling.
Thank you. Last question, Mr. Viola. I read in your testimony about the alarming situation ongoing for our air tour operators at several of our national parks. It seems the FAA and National Park Service are rushing to meet a court-ordered deadline, but have opted to exclude critical stakeholders like the National Parks Overflights Advisory Group. As you mentioned, air tour operators offer people with disabilities and often the elderly an opportunity to view and enjoy some of our nation's most treasured landscapes they otherwise would not be able to see. I have also been told that some of these air group operators in off-season help the federal government fight wildfires and other natural disaster events. Do you have any suggestions on how we can help alleviate this issue?
Thank you very much for that question and pointing that issue. You know, in 2020, the NPOG was established by Congress. That's really all we need to do is follow what was established by Congress. There was a court order in 2020 that drove the two agencies together, and they basically went underground, the National Park Service and the FAA, and they're now processing all that information on their own. What you had required in 2020 and 2000 as Congress was for industry to work together, and the solutions we were working were, you know, what aircraft were making what noise, what altitudes. We were actually trying to work together to make sure that we can continue to have access for the public. And as you probably hear as well with your constituents, anytime I tell people that, you know, the National Park Service is trying to prevent all overflights, they're shocked because they have actually gone out and participated, and we're able to view our beautiful parks from the air. So I think going back and looking at the NPOG, what was established in 2000, and ensure that cooperation happens.
Well, thank you, Mr. Rowland, and you have my commitment. I'll continue to look into this.
Thank you.
I yield back.
Thank you. Before I go to Representative Titus from Nevada, just a quick administrative update. We'll go to Representative Titus. We will recess, and then we'll come back. There are 2 votes. We're in the middle of one right now, so it shouldn't be, after the recess, shouldn't be any more, well, famous last words, any more than 30 minutes. I would guess less than that. And we'll come back and we'll see if there are any other members who have questions. So I would ask for your patience, but to wait for us to come back, if you don't mind. But before that, we'll go to Representative Titus to recognize for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to share some figures with you that are good news before I ask my question. Compared to pre-pandemic levels, general aviation traffic is up 20% at the Henderson Executive Airport in Southern Nevada. It's up 7% at the North Las Vegas Airport. And this is thanks largely to a number of events that have occurred in Las Vegas, the draft, the football draft, and the Pro Bowl and the opening up of Raider Stadium. We think that's going to increase even more as we look towards the Super Bowl and also Formula One races. So this is a very important part of the economy and the tourist sector in Southern Nevada. But going back to the previous question, many of the people who come to Las Vegas know that it's more than just the bright lights on the strip. They like to look at our surrounding areas. And so I'm interested in the work that you are doing with the national parks, Mr. Villela, as well, because I think there are 23 national parks. And I just wonder what impact you think this plan is going to have on the helicopter tourism industry out of Las Vegas, many of whom fly over Lake Mead or Grand Canyon.
Yes, thank you very much for that question. Yes, that's a problem, and we are trying to highlight that right now, that the plans as they are being put together without going through the NPOG, without having industry input, are very concerning to being able to, you know, put a lot of those people out of business. So yes, we would love to follow up with on this topic and provide as much detail as you'd like to hear, ma'am.
Thank you. I'd like to do that. And there's no ability to have local government input or the convention center input. It's just strictly behind closed doors with the National Park Service.
Yeah, the technique they are using is, you know, they have done some open meetings, but you'll see by the meetings, or if you watch one of them on YouTube, they're really not taking any questions. Some of your constituents have actually written in and provided additional documents, and they have not been acknowledged. So it's not a good thing that's going on right now in that area.
Well, I appreciate if you'd work with me and see if we can't at least have some voice in there.
Yes, ma'am. We will reach out and connect and ensure that we work together on this.
Well, thank you. One other thing I'd like to ask you, I'm the co-chair of the Unmanned Aircraft Systems Caucus, and we've been hearing about some unauthorized drones who interfere with the helicopters, especially when they're fighting fires. Would you kind of address that, of how we can be sure that only authorized drones are in that airspace and they don't interfere with any operations y'all might be engaged in?
Yes, ma'am. So currently, when we have firefighting operations going on, the FAA will put out a temporary flight restriction in those areas. But what happens is it ends up being the participants or the ones that are qualified to fly the UAS will stay out of those areas. So what we do have is we have non-participants or people that aren't flying in accordance with the rules that are actually interfering. They're interfering with firefighting, and they're also interfering with aeromedical, and nothing better that they try to do is launch a UAS so they can get a look at an accident scene. So we're really trying to do some public awareness and working with the FAA on ways to prevent or have some counter-drone capability. So when there are some public safety issues going on, such as firefighting and or air ambulance emergencies going on, that we can somehow help keep those out of the area.
Is there anything this committee can do to help you in that? Or is it just strictly you and the FAA? Anything Congress can do? Maybe in the reauthorization?
I couldn't see the question. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear it.
The question was for anyone here, as we're trying to keep the unauthorized drone activities from becoming a safety hazard to general aviation. They just don't understand that there's other aviation that is out there.
Yeah, we're certainly very concerned about some of the drone usage, and we want a safe integration of that airspace. We believe in drones. We think it's the right thing for our economy, but it's got to be done with a detect and avoid for general aviation, not put the burden on the small aircraft below 400 feet. It doesn't work that way.
And there does need to be civil penalties. Just like if somebody points a laser at a pilot, that is a safety of flight issue. And if we hit one of these drones out there with an aircraft or a rotorcraft, it's different than a bird. That battery can come through the windscreen and be very dangerous. So we've got to enforce the airspace rules.
Well, maybe you can work with us on the caucus to see if we can come up with something that helps both sides. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now I yield back.
Thank you very much. Since I have called for votes on the House floor, the committee will recess. We'll restart the hearing as soon as the last vote is over again. There are 2 votes. One is the time's out, but there's 350 people left to vote, so it'll be a little bit as we rush over. But I'm sorry, 330 people. So 20 people voted in the time I said that. So we'll be back. I guarantee I will be back, and then we'll make an assessment then. So I really do appreciate the indulgence of the panel. And with that, the committee will be in recess.
That's this one. Test, 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 test. We've been going back and forth with back, so it was muted. Yeah, it should be fine now. We like to be anyway. Test, 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 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. It should be good to go. Key is just making sure test, 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 1, 2, 3.
Just give folks a few minutes to get back. Call the committee to order. We'll continue with member questions. And Chair calls on Representative Auchincloss from Massachusetts for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and I appreciate letting me wave onto the committee to ask these questions. In the commercial aviation sector, my constituents, and indeed as someone who commutes back and forth between Boston and Washington, have been really very significantly disrupted by staffing shortages in the commercial airlines and the flight delays that has led to. We're seeing that commercial airlines are scheduling flights that are almost guaranteed to not be able to fly because of the lack of pilots and staff, which is really not an acceptable business practice. I know that some of my colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle have asked about the impact of staffing shortages in general aviation, and I'd like to continue that line of questioning. Mr. Baker, as you mentioned, the shortage of air traffic controllers has been causing delays for an extended time, and the FAA is working to increase controller staffing. Can you shed some light on factors that have led to staffing shortfalls within the industry?
So there is clearly an opportunity for young people to join aviation right now, and you can tell by the average wages that are going up in all sectors in aviation. The demand is high and the supply is not enough. And one of the reasons why we have our high school program is to introduce young people into aviation in 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade, and look forward to growing that program significantly. We do know that the FAA has had some recruiting going on for air traffic controllers and had big turnout for people that did apply for the jobs. But it takes a long time to get up to speed to run one of the bigger sectors in ATC centers of that traffic. So there's a long lead time to have an employee and an experienced employee ready to take on those roles. So we believe and have seen in every sector, including general aviation, where there's a shortage of flight instructors and others and maintenance workers in general aviation as well. But we continue to be working through that, and people are attracted to aviation, fortunately, because it is a fun and interesting industry.
Can you and others can also jump into this? Can you speak about work that both general and commercial aviation could do to diversify and make more resilient and widen the pipeline for new talent coming into this industry? And what help the airlines should be giving to invest in this new pipeline, given that they have used buyouts and early retirements during the pandemic, despite more than $50 billion in federal aid, whether they need to be making investments now to replenish and strengthen and make more resilient that staffing shortfall, both for pilots and also, as you have said, for designated pilot examiners, who I know are another shortage area.
So one of the things that we've recorded in our high school program thus far in the last 5 years is that 40% or more of the kids taking these programs come out of underrepresented groups, minorities. 25% are young women. Both sectors are underrepresented in the aviation working world today. So creating the pathways and interest and showing them that they can too be participating in this world, and we need them, is a really big part of our high school initiative. And I think that's the first place you get that done.
We're talking about 5-10-year projects. I know you don't train a pilot or an air traffic controller or a DPE overnight, nor would I think anybody would want you to. We're facing a summer of disruption right now. And I see an analogy here with healthcare, where we've got significant shortages in healthcare staffing, acutely felt in Massachusetts, where a big cause of that has been a lack of immigration. We're 2 million immigrants short of where we were supposed to be based on pre-pandemic trajectories. I'd be interested to hear from you or from any of your colleagues here at the witness table, what can we do to increase the number of certified immigrants coming to the United States who could help staff the airline industry in the short term?
Regarding federal contract towers, and thank you for the question, the contractors are not able to develop their own workforce. They must rely on federally certified air traffic controllers trained only by the FAA. They are developing a business case for how they could help develop the pipeline starting in contract towers, which may very well include a more diverse workforce, kind of the next generation of those that are underrepresented. They would still have to be trained and certified by the FAA, but as of right now, and this is a big item that could be included in an upcoming FAA reauthorization, having the contract tower operators help develop their own workforce would be a huge initiative in that direction.
Well, I would certainly encourage in this reauthorization that both general and commercial aviation think about how we can expand and diversify the training pipeline, and also how we can look to immigrants and other non-traditional populations for help in the short term, because we can't take much more of the disruptions that we're seeing in the airports across the United States. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. I understand Representative Van Drew is logged on. If Representative Van Drew is logged on. Just the folks at home, just give us a few minutes, a few moments. It will not be a few minutes. Just a moment. I can get a clear message from staff on okay, we understand he is logged on, and we are just trying to get him up. 15 seconds. So long as everyone's comfortable with silence. There you go. Representative Van Drew, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, good afternoon by now. Thank you to Chairman Larson and Ranking Member Graves for holding today's hearings on the state of general aviation. General aviation encompasses many different sectors, but today I would like to focus on the advanced aviation technologies of unmanned aircraft systems. We know it as UAS. And advanced aviation mobility AAM. My district in South Jersey is home to the William J. Hughes Technical Center, where cutting-edge research is happening in the UAS office and in the AAM program. This committee, the FAA, and the aviation stakeholders community are in conversation to determine how to best structure federal organizations and policies so that these industries may grow in a safe and an efficient manner. With next year's FAA authorization around the corner, this hearing is an excellent opportunity to publicly explore how we can improve the federal government to unlock the potential of advanced aviation. I offer my questions to three of our witnesses: Jim Viola of Helicopters Association International, Pete Bunce of the General Aviation Manufacturers Association, and Mark Barker of the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. My question is this: is the FAA's current approach to rulemaking and certification for UAS and AAM operations satisfactory? If not, please elaborate on the ways that you would improve the FAA's approach from both an organizational and a policymaking standard. Mr. Viola, please respond first, followed by Mr. Bunce and Mr. Baker, and I will yield the remainder of my time for these responses. Thank you so much, Chairman.
Thank you, Congressman, for that question. A very important question indeed with the FAA's ability to be flexible with certification and also ensure the safety. I really think that I would recommend a top-level look at even what the FAA mission statement is today, and then see what it is we're requiring them. We all talked workforce issues today. The FAA, as a government agency, also has a workforce. I think you'll hear some other peers here talk about, the growth of government as well as, industry side. I think there's a lot of work that we can do on industry side to help keep the FAA at a smaller, more oversight capability without all the necessary for growing a workforce that tries to keep up with the rapid pace of technology.
Representative Vendry, I would add that we are supportive of a technology office at the FAA, but the purpose of that office needs to be to break down the stovepipes in the lines of business. We learned through the Garmin Autoland system where somebody with an incapacitated pilot can push a button and that airplane will land autonomously, that the Air Traffic Control Organization wasn't involved in the development, or the right people from the ATO weren't involved, and that really hampered and caused that program to be 7 years long. What we would, though, be very wary of is if we went and separated out, like the certification directorate, and pulled people out of there to just work that one segment, because it's interdependent with the aviation industry that we already have established. Take fly-by-wire, or take the autonomy that's already being built in the aircraft. They need to rely on that expertise to be able to go and make advanced air mobility work. So we've got to make the stovepipes work together, but we don't want to bust up the stovepipes.
Adding to that only would be the general expectation that when it becomes rulemaking, it is not expedited at all. We've been working and waiting for the Mosaic, which is an update for the aircraft certifications for, I think, 6 years in that rulemaking effort. It's basically on the shelf. We're standing by for the LOTA rulemaking. It's not a good process when it goes and just sits and doesn't have the urgency and the timelines associated with it. So that's our kind of feeling about it.
Okay, well, I thank you, and I am disappointed to hear the last statement, but understand where you're coming from. Hopefully, we will do better with the rulemaking and move forward. I mean, this is obviously the cutting edge technology that's going to bring us into the future. So with that, I will yield, and Chairman, once again, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Van Drew. The chair recognizes Representative Perry of Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And for the folks that are testifying here today and answering some questions, my questions would be for Mr. Baker. When we left, we were talking about the Eagle, I guess, initiative or what have you. It seems like everybody here loves it. I just want to go on record. I guess we're forcing you to love it. I don't love it. I don't know that it's any good. I got a lot of questions and concerns about it. Now, even you said, some of you said, somebody here said that we've never done this with a fuel before, right? We've never done, there might be a reason for that, right? And the unintended consequences, the gentleman from New Jersey, my colleague from New Jersey, talked about the cost of going to flight school, especially for people that have a hard time coming up with the money to learn. It's expensive. I don't necessarily think the costs that I heard here are actually reflective of the true cost of the whole thing. At the same time, we're promoting stuff like this, which I'm not a rocket scientist, all right, but this raises the cost for everybody, right? So you talk about making it affordable. At the same time, this very committee, of course, you all have to be committed to it because we told you got to be, right? So I'm not picking on you, but for Mr. Baker, Santa Clara County has unilaterally prohibited the sale of 100 low-lit, right? And it violates their AIP grant assurances, increases the risk of misfueling. And I wonder if you can comment on that situation if it left unaddressed in other municipalities or political enclaves seek to do that, and if it poses a particular threat to the general aviation industry overall, and particularly to things like disaster relief, emergency operations, search and rescue, or particular law enforcement issues. And then, finally, in that regard, what should this Congress and the FAA do about that?
It's a great question, and I thank you for that one. We are really concerned about the slippery slope of letting these individual airports violate their agreements and decide that they're going to only carry one type of fuel, not another type of fuel, which is a huge safety concern. If an airplane gets misfueled, the engine will detonate. It will become a problem, and the airplane is going to come down. The request that we put into the FAA and the FAA legal group is to say you can't violate those grant assurances and you must keep all this fuel available. The FAA has not been able to come to agreement with Santa Clara County.
Has not been able to, or is unwilling to enforce? Like they enforce their will on the rest of us around here, right? I mean, you go install the wrong, floor in your 1947 Bonanza, and see what happens to you. So tell me if they can't or they won't.
The response was it's complicated, and I know that. If it was easy, we would have solved it a long time ago. But it's a very important safety issue, and I believe that the regulator, who is in charge of safety of aviation in this country, should take that at the paramount, most important part first. That if we get this misfueling done, and it will happen, it's a big problem.
Is there something, look, we're in the Aviation Subcommittee. I thank the gentleman for calling the hearing. This is an important issue. These are important issues. What should we be doing about it? Like, I will tell you, I already have concerns about the program. I don't know what's wrong with 100 low lead. If we want alternatives, okay, God bless it, let the market work that out. There's a whole bunch of aircraft out there that use them, that use 100 low lead, and I guess, if we're gonna go back to the cost of flight school, I guess we're gonna change every single engine in every one of these GA community aircraft. Like, what can this committee, what should this Congress be doing about this situation?
In the urgency of asking the FAA to respond to make sure that we do not lose 100 low lead until the transition is complete. We support the transition. It is the right thing to do long term. We need to hold the refiners, and I do think they will, be competitive with the current price of fuel, because there is only one supply of low lead, by the way, the lead in the world. I'm worried about the supply chain.
But even when you say that, with all due respect, you say, we make sure the suppliers provide it. As we force it to be phased out, the market isn't doing this. This is self-imposed regulatory ideology and policy coming from the government. And you're saying, we're going to force you to keep making it even though your market's diminishing and even though we're telling you your market, we're going to destroy your market for doing this. What do you think that's going to do to the price of 100 low lead?
I believe that the opportunity for the alternative fuel to be made by the current refiners is high, and so they'll have an opportunity to change over to that other fuel. It's the right thing to do. But I will also tell you, we need time to make that transition safely, or we're going to risk a very significant part of the aviation's ecosystem.
I thank the gentleman. Yield.
Thank you, Representative Perry. That concludes our hearing. I want to thank the witnesses for their testimony. The comments and insights have been very informative and very helpful. So I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. And I know a few members have questions for the record. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or the witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. So with that objection, so ordered. And with that, the subcommittee stands adjourned.